Thank you for viewing this recording of a free event provided by Next Village San Francisco for our community. Next Village San Francisco is a local nonprofit providing services and support that empowers seniors to live independently in their own homes. We welcome people who want to keep connected with their community as members, volunteers, and supporters. We host 30 to 40 free activities and events each month for the public, and our members have access to our network of volunteers. Learn more and get involved at nextvillagesf.org. We hope you enjoy this video.
I was going to talk a little bit about keeping our brains healthy because I think that's always a very, very popular topic. And now if I can, oh dear, now how do I adjust slides? Return, no, done. Oh, there you go, let's try that, okay, once again, Kate saved me. So the things we're going to talk about today, I do like to start with some normal basic brain functions because we can't understand how things can go wrong before we understand how they work normally. I'm going to talk about some of the normal brain changes we have with aging because we do all have those. Illnesses that can affect our brain, strategies for maintaining brain health, and I'm going to touch on the peripheral nervous system, which always gets forgotten, but is really important. So, a bit of an anatomy review. The brain is composed, can you see my cursor on the screen there? Maybe not. Yeah, you can. Okay. So the brain is composed of different portions or lobes. The frontal lobes do a lot of our planning and thinking. The motor cortex here is responsible for our movement. The parietal lobe kind of keeps everything organized. And the occipital lobe is where we bring in visual images and then analyze them. And then the temporal lobe is integral and with other parts of the brain for learning and memory. So if you look at a brain and you kind of cut through it like this, so you're looking at it from the inside out, this is a nice sort of a view because you can appreciate how folded the surface of the brain is. The nerve cells or neurons live on the top surface of the brain, and they fold in on themselves because that allows us to get a whole lot more cells into this contained structures. And the more developed the brain is, the more complex looking and involuted it is, or convoluted it is, as you see here. If you took someone's brain and you stretch it all flat, it would be about the size of New York Times laid flat on your kitchen table. And it's all folded in on itself and crammed in that brain, which is wonderful. So that's how we fit about 80 billion nerve cells in there. If you have all those cells on the top of the brain, they need to connect with each other, and they need to also connect going down through our nervous system. You know, the brain controls moving our arms and our legs. Well, there's got to be nerve fibers that eventually connect down to those muscles to move our arms and our legs. And so this is a beautiful image where they've actually colored a lot of those nerve tract connections. And so imaging of the brain has gotten very, very fancy. And so we're learning a whole lot more about how it works, which is wonderful. And if we look at the brain from another direction, if we sliced through it like this, we would actually then have a view of all of those fiber tracts as they come from the brain and come down towards other deeper areas in the brain and to the spinal cord. And that's a common way to look at the brain. The reason I wanted to have you look at this is because you can see in this brain, the general gray area is all the nerve cells. The very dark black area is spinal fluid, which is in these sacs inside the brain, and also which separates the brain from the skull around it so it doesn't get bruised. And in all of these cells, then there are those tracts that connect down to other brain regions and to the body. But you see these white spots. And these white spots are not normal. It means that something has changed in the brain and the tissue isn't working quite like it should. It's very, very subtle. and slight damage. We call that white matter hyperintensities. When MRI scans first came out in the 80s, we didn't know what these white spots were, and we called them UBOs, unidentified bright objects. That's a true story. And we're still studying them. We still don't fully understand them, but we know there's a mismatch between how much oxygen cells need and how much is being delivered. Most all of us have a few of these spots in our 40s, and a good over 80% of us have them by the time we're in our 60s. If we have a whole lot of them, it can lead to some trouble in how well the brain works. So some normal changes that we all have in our brain with aging. The brain shrinks, and the hippocampus, which is that medial area of the temporal lobes integral for memory, that shrinks as well. Those long nerve cell fibers have insulation around them, just like the electrical wires in our homes. That insulation is called myelin, and it makes sure the message gets effectively from point A to point B. That breaks down a bit too. So some of the messages may get lost along the way. Nerve cells communicate with one another through specialized regions called receptors. They have these branches called dendrites and synapses. So those specialized protein connections between the cells can also break down a little bit. So those all tend to happen with aging. So the phenomenon of where did I leave my keys can happen more often. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong, but it is consistent with our brains aging. So how do we adapt to those kinds of changes in our day-to-day lives? We need to give ourselves a little bit more time to come up with answers, because as I talked about, you're going to have slowing down of the communication between nerve cells in different regions of the brain. So it might take a little bit more time to come up with an answer. We used to think that after 30 or so, it was all downhill. I mean, when I was in medical school, they literally did use the term, old dogs can't learn new tricks. Now, we know that's wrong now. Old dogs can learn new tricks. And it turns out that with aging in the brain, some of those receptors may break down, but the actual branching between those nerve cells can become more complex, which allows an aged brain to be better equipped to note disparities from diverse sources of information. And that may be the root of wisdom. So it may take a little longer, but you're coming up with a sounder answer. You can see the forest through the trees, so to speak. In our day-to-day lives, try to keep it simple and just realize that if you're doing multitasking, you're setting yourself up for potential failures. So don't get upset if it happens. And as I mentioned, the retrieval just takes a little bit longer. So give yourself some time. Don't be hard on yourself. These are general tips for brain health, and research keeps supporting these over and over and over again. Challenge your mind to do new things. The brain is hardwired to seek out novelty. So you really do want to shake it up. It's not always just doing Wordle or always doing the New York Times crossword puzzle throughout the week. Your brain really, really wants variety. So challenge it with different things. Keep learning, stay in school. Having more education in our youth is a solid foundation to stave off cognitive decline later in life. Later in life, we can still challenge ourselves. Keep up with classes, get moving. 30 minutes of a moderate activity 5 days a week is the general recommendation. Most important is that you find an exercise that you will do, that fits into your routine. So don't let anyone tell you what's the perfect exercise. The perfect exercise is the one that you will do consistently. A moderate activity is any activity where you're working hard enough that if someone called you on the phone, they would notice you were just a little bit out of breath, or maybe you work up a light sweat. So that's a pretty good generalized definition of what a moderate activity is. And so that varies from person to person. Simple things: protect your head, avoid smoke, control blood pressure, manage diabetes, eat a healthy diet, Mediterranean, the MIND diet, the DASH diet, Maybe even the vegan diet, there's evidence suggesting that that can be even more healthful. Maintain a healthy weight, and by all means, sleep well at night. Most important in sleep is actually a regular schedule, not the amount, but the regularity of your routine. So brain training is a really hot topic. Everybody knows, what can I do? What can I do to keep my brain sharp? It's a nice area for research. And so more research is going on around that. What's going on with my computer?
No,
Keep going. Okay.
I'm just admitting people as well.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. That multitasking thing I was talking about. I don't even know what she's doing here. But so there's a lot of programs out there. I just put some of them up here. Mind Sharpener is one that we do offer through seniors at home. And Mind Sharpener is a little bit unique in that it is an in-person activity. The other exercises that I have on the screen here are all based on a computer or on a phone. And so Kate did give you all some handouts about our Mind Sharpener program. Lumosity has been around for a while, and I've got costs, approximate monthly costs on each of these. Lumosity is one of the older ones, which is good, and Elevate came along to kind of compete with Lumosity. Lumosity is more geared towards older individuals. Elevate is very much like Lumosity, but it's just brighter and more active. So, I mean, they're similar. Brain HQ was started by Dr. Merznick at UCSF, and that's being studied. And they're really looking, they've got over 100 articles published already. And they're really looking at whether or not doing the brain exercises in their program could be generalizable. So the term generalizable means that if you're doing one activity in a brain training program, you get benefits in other areas of your brain. And so that's been one of the big challenges here. Early on in the days of Lumosity, they made that claim, and they were actually sued over that because what they found in the early days with Lumosity, they were doing a lot of visually challenging games. Those I would recommend to people if they were looking to try and improve their driving skills, because if you're on one of those computer games where you're picking up objects from the side and everything, that's exactly what you're doing with driving. So that skill would improve on these early brain training games, but other skills would not. So with Brain HQ, they're actually feel they're getting closer to this concept of having generalizable benefit, but we need more time, more research on this. Fit Brains was put out by Rosetta Stone. So Rosetta Stone put out Fit Brains, and it has some social skills on it, which makes it a little bit unique. Cognifit is used a fair amount in research, and Peak at the bottom there is one which is sanctioned or approved for both adults and kids. So if you wanted to do something with kids or grandkids, maybe Peak might be a good option. So this is only some of them. There are a ton of them out there. Don't let anybody tell you any one is the best. We don't have evidence to know which one is the best. It's kind of like the exercise, which one fits you the best. So talking a little bit about left versus right brain function. Motor control in the brain is crossed. So the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. But we've come to understand more and more both sides really do need to work together. Communication or language tends to be more heavily concentrated on the left. That's also where we tend to strategize to solve problems, and mathematics more on the left side of the brain. Memories more on the left side, and analytical thinking, whereas the right side is more the creative, intuitive, and emotional side of our brain. But importantly, they need to both work together. And more research is going on with stroke patients showing ways that they can recover after injury and how one side of the brain can take over a function from the other. So neurology is really wonderful in terms of the research that's going on with it. So now we need to take a little breather here and do a little brain game. So can anyone find the face in that screen of coffee beans?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
I did too.
I didn't. Did you find it?
Yep.
No, you're close though. You got it. Ethel got it. Yeah, right here.
Oh, yeah.
But that looks like the top of a head. You're right. But there you even.
It's on the screen better than, I think this.
Yeah, so it's right there.
Right there, yeah. In the lower left, you see this.
Yep, there's the nose and the eyebrows and the eyes and the big forehead.
See, you had too much coffee.
Oh, that's where it is. Okay. Now I get it. Okay. It is hard. Yeah. So there's different kinds of games that you can do. It's fun. All right, now I need to talk about cerebrovascular disease because that's something we should always be thinking about. All right, more than half of the people who survive a stroke develop some cognitive impairment within the first year. And this is probably very, very underdiagnosed and under-recognized. This stems from the fact that people are recovering their motor function and they're just not noticing what might be missing in their head. As many as 1 in 3 people who recover from a stroke develop dementia within 5 years. That's a fair number. And cerebrovascular disease is still a very common type of significant injury and death in our country. So we'll talk a little bit here about strokes and stroke factors. This is an MRI of the brain. So again, this is the image where we're going through like this. And this is pretty obvious. I mean, that's all normal looking brain. And there you have this, and this is a large stroke. This probably comes from the blockage of a fairly significant artery because you have a big wedge shaped area of tissue here, which looks bright. It's been damaged. And this changes over time with the imaging. So when you have a large area of brain like that damaged, generally people are going to be aware of it and they'll seek treatment. And we now do have good treatments. They can go in and they can put in a medicine that will dissolve the clot and get fresh blood flowing in there. And so recoveries really have been improved, which is wonderful. So some definitions around cerebrovascular disease. Cerebrovascular disease is a condition that affects blood flow to the brain. That's just a general description. It can come from many different things. You can block a blood vessel with a clot. You can have a blood vessel which breaks open and causes bleeding into the brain. You can have an aneurysm, which is a weakness in the blood vessel wall that bursts and spills blood into the brain. You can have illness in the carotid arteries, the main ones in the neck, that breaks off and goes to the brain. You can have an artery which develops a tear in the wall and that spreads blood through the wall so that it blocks itself off. That's called a dissection. You can have venous malformations where the arteries and the veins don't make the proper kinds of connections. Again, most of those latter ones are all a potential cause for bleeding and all potential cause of stroke. A stroke is a medical emergency, and so they've developed the letterism there, FAST, the main symptoms being a facial droop, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. So that was really popular a couple of years ago and still around because we can do something about it.
Oh, yeah.
So causes of cerebrovascular disease, I mentioned the blood clot. That can come from the carotid arteries. You can also have a blood clot that travels to your brain from someplace else, most commonly the heart. So when someone has a stroke, they always want to look at the heart because irregularities in the heart can lead to a clot forming there. And on the left side of the heart, the aorta comes up like this, and the main arteries that go up to your head are almost right off the top of the arch, so they're kind of a straight shot. So if your heart has got a clot in it, the odds of it breaking off and going up to the brain are pretty good. Again, you can have a blood vessel that breaks with uncontrolled high blood pressure. You can have plaque or buildup in the walls of the arteries called atherosclerosis. And I previously mentioned the structural abnormalities, the AVMs. You can also have a brain injury from a fall, from a blow to the head, which can cause bleeding in the brain, which once again is a stroke. So there's a lot of different causes of stroke. There's also something which is called a TIA. And TIA stands for transient ischemic attack, which means that you're not getting blood to the brain, but that's just for a very short period of time. And then it resolves. It's usually a soft clot obstructing a blood vessel that breaks off, lasts generally 5 minutes or so, but it should be gone within 24 hours. A TIA is a risk factor for stroke. So anybody who has a transient ischemic attack should get seen by their doctor and be evaluated of their stroke risk. It can be hard to see these with brain imaging. MRI scanning is much better, but most of the time in emergency room settings, they use a CAT scan, which might miss the things they'd see on an MRI scan. And there's kind of a cost benefit analysis there. I mean, they can't do MRI scans and everyone coming into the emergency room. So that's just, I wanted you to be aware of that definition. And this image that I showed you previously from the cross section through the brain with all of those spots, one of those could have been a TIA, or the person may not have been aware of any of these, because you can accumulate a lot of these spots and not be aware that you're missing anything. Again, if you disrupt those white matter tracks, you might have subtle deficits that can be picked up on very detailed cognitive testing, but you wouldn't notice in your day-to-day interactions with others. So the factors contributing to cerebrovascular disease, there's a very complex interaction between our genetic factors and the environment. Oftentimes, though, if it tends to run in your family, you are at higher risk. The controllable risk factors for stroke are blood sugar, your blood pressure, and the high cholesterol, as well as smoking. Head trauma, we try to control too. Stress, we should work on keeping under control. I'm hoping we don't have much recreational drug use in this group. I certainly saw it when I was doing training in an emergency setting. Cocaine is a big one for causing bleeding in the brain and stroke. Heart arrhythmias, just get your heart checked out. If you guys have probably heard ads for like atrial fibrillation. That's a big risk factor for stroke. So get all these things checked out. And I'm sorry I had to throw pregnancy in there because it does increase your risk for stroke. But main steps to reduce your risk factors, control all those ones which we have listed there. And my favorite of all, exercise. As a matter of fact, if we could prescribe exercise as a pill, it would be the #1 prescribed and taken medication in this country, for sure. So find what works for you. I actually already went over this when I was talking about exercise, just moving more, the 30 minutes of a moderate activity. Try alternative approaches like using the stairs instead of the elevator, walk outside rather than checking your email or getting a cup of coffee, or best yet, walk to a coffee shop. So stress and our brains. Stress is something that we all have built into ourselves as a response to danger. So it's a self-protective mechanism, fight or flight, which all animals have. So we experience acute stress, like if we almost have a car accident and someone runs through a stop sign and just misses our bumper. That's an acute stress. We have episodic acute stress if they're just ongoing, recurring mini crises. And then there's chronic stress, such as caring for loved one with a chronic illness. And there is research to suggest that this kind of a chronic stress may cause some rewiring of the brain, putting us in a more continual survival mode. And when we're in a survival mode, we're not actively taking in new information and learning and working our brains. We're just focusing on survival. Chronic stress can increase loss of cells in the hippocampus, in the brain. They can as chronic stress adversely affects our immune system, which is amazing. And not surprisingly, it impairs our ability to fall asleep and to stay asleep at night. So that's really should be nothing new for any of us. So what can we do around stress? Try to figure out where your stressors are and where might you try to get some control over that situation. So if you're feeling completely overwhelmed with something, try breaking it down into pieces, writing it down and looking at them separately and see, well, where can I try to exert some control here? That's one of the most important steps to try and take. Everybody wants to get a good night's sleep. Establish healthy routines. And if you've got bad routines like watching news before bedtime, that's a really big no-no. Do never watch news before bedtime. I tell people that all of the time because that just revs your system up. Okay, so don't let yourself do that. That's break that bad cycle. Help yourself stay better organized with keeping lists. So a lot of people find that if they're having a hard time settling down at night because they're worrying about what they're doing the next day, write it down so you know you've got it somewhere. Reach out and get help if you need it. So many times we think, I can do this myself, I can do this myself. And reaching out and asking for help is a really important first step to feel better supported and stronger so you can tackle problems. And all of this is changing our attitude around stress, recognizing where it's coming into us, putting limits on it where we can. I honestly feel like we've let ourselves become a society that's totally captured into it through social media. So put stops on those feeds of negative stories and such, recognizing that they're contributing to your stress, and strive for healthier responses like getting out for that walk. So a little bit more on sleep. The very sad news is the first line there is that our sleep deteriorates with aging. It actually is more shallow. We have more interruptions. So that's an ongoing thing. So we need to work harder with good sleep habits to keep our sleep healthy. In addition, there are a lot of medications, either over the counter or prescribed by physicians, which can interfere with sleep. So if you're having trouble with sleep, talk over your medicines with your doctor to see if there might be something that you're taking which is contributing to the difficulty. And sometimes a medicine which is taken at bedtime can be taken in the morning and the problem with sleep is resolved. Sleep is not a passive process. We have come to realize through research that during sleep, our brain is actively working, clearing out the circuits and literally cleaning up debris, which we've accumulated during the day. How many of you are familiar with the lymphatic system of drainage? Lymphatic system is the passive drainage system that if it gets blocked up, you get swelling. Like women, when they used to get mastectomies, would have all those lymph nodes removed, and they'd have big swelling of their arm because that was because the lymphatic system couldn't get through because they'd removed the lymph nodes. Anyway, so we know that about the body. Recently, they discovered that the brain actually has something like that. we knew the brain didn't have a lymphatic system like we have in our arms and legs and the rest of the body. They actually do have something that has been dubbed the glymphatic system. And so the brain is literally sweeping up debris and discarding it through that system during our deep sleep. So it's really important. You can take young, healthy people and deprive them stage 3 to 4 sleep, and this was actually done with young kids over at Berkeley. It was a while ago. I'm not sure if they do it today, but they sleep deprived and then they put them through tests. And sure enough, if they're sleep deprived, they do not perform as well on test the following day. So that old thing, cramming all night, isn't going to work out that well. So sleep is really, really important, as I have on the slide there. REM sleep clarifies connections, and it's really important for learning. So take care of your sleep to keep your brain healthy. Now I have a different kind of a puzzle. All right, this one's not a visual puzzle. So the housekeeper was distraught after she found Fred and Ginger lying dead on the floor. There was some broken glass near their bodies and the carpet was wet. Neither of them was wearing any clothes. Who killed Fred and Ginger? Think outside the box, think creatively.
Oh, I got it. It was fish.
Fred and Ginger are the two goldfish and the cat knocked the bowl over. That's exactly right. So you have to think outside the box, see? All right. So lastly, I want to touch on the peripheral nervous system because I think it gets forgotten a lot. So the peripheral nervous system is really important to our brains for sensory input, our eyes and our ears. There's been research done showing that lack of visual input leads to more brain decline. Lack of auditory input can also lead to cognitive losses. So those are really, really important. But also, our brain is always getting information coming up from sensory receptors in our joints, in our muscles, and in our tendons, telling us where we are in space. Just like I was talking about earlier with loss of myelin and some breakdown in the proteins on those receptors between the cells, this system breaks down a bit as well. So doing extra exercises, working on your balance is really, really important to keep you more stable and prevent falls with associated head injury, which is something that we want to do to maintain brain health. So I just wanted to touch on this because I don't think we, think about it much. And I think that's getting close to the end of my presentation here. So
One.
right. So just my closing points here, just the brain is complex. We need to take good care of it to keep it healthy. Using compensatory strategies and tools can help us compensate for some of those normal changes with aging. Do things to keep your brain challenged and agile. I think specifically trying to keep our brains agile is a good concept. It's not just exercising, but agile. Work proactively to prevent stroke and cerebrovascular disease. Use that regular exercise with a healthy diet and sleep. Be aware of those changes in your peripheral sensory system and get on top of them. Keep up with your eye checks, get your hearing checked, get hearing aids early, and enjoy life to the fullest every day because this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is our final show. And that is it. So thank you very much. And now, if we've got some questions.
Yeah, we'll see what we chat, but yeah, we'll take our. Yeah. Yeah, so does anyone have questions for Dr. Madison? Oh,
Really?
We've heard in recent years about the growth of feelings of isolation, especially among older people, social isolation. And I wonder if you can make any just comments about maybe what research has said about its effect on cognitive issues over time.
Their social isolation during COVID, they actually tracked a significant increase in deaths of people with cognitive impairment because of the severe isolation during COVID. And there is other research supporting that isolation with the general accompanying lack of stimulation and input furthers cognitive decline. So I mean, I can't reference one particular study for you, but there is absolutely a connection, yes. So we have to work at keeping ourselves active and engaged.
Mm-hmm. How about listening to music? Listening to music.
Or is it still like the left side of the brain controls communication strategy, and on the right side creativity? Is it reversed in a left-handed person?
It varies. It varies. You know, I mean, a left-handed person could actually be left brain dominant, or they could be right brain dominant. It varies. So when they're doing, they actually have a test they do. Well, they'll put one side of the brain to sleep while a person is conscious and have them speak to determine which side language is on.
Women, I mean, maybe it changes as we age, but women in general are better at multitasking, is what I've always read. Versus men are better at focusing on one thing at a time.
You're right, that's been said, and you know, I think we always do it. We're more hardwired for it. Our brains are better equipped at it. Yes. It's true.
Thought and observed.
Correct. That's accurate. But we do all have more trouble with it as we age, and so we've got to just be aware of that and cut back on the complexity.
Yeah, I used to be able to do 3 things at once, now maybe I can do 2.
Bingo. I agree.
On these brain training things,
Mhm.
this is something we just go on our computer and search for it or
Yep.
find the program.
Yep.
And these are one-time or monthly fees?
Those are monthly fees. Yeah, except for the mind sharpener through seniors at home, which is the more expensive one. That's a single cost for the program.
We don't have a date right now for the next series, but it'll be on the website.
Any other questions from the group before we, okay?
About sleep, I heard that 10 o'clock to midnight is really essential to be sleeping, and it had something to do with when it gets dark and just how we evolve. But the days are longer or shorter, so it didn't make sense to me that 10 to 12 would always be, that maybe it's a certain number of hours after sunset. So I was just curious if you know of any research about optimum times to sleep.
The research around sleep, I haven't seen anything stating specifically 10 to 12, but the most important is having a regular pattern to your sleep. There isn't even a magic number. For some people, they can actually do fine on 5 hours. For most people, it's somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. But most important is not the hours between 10 and 12, but it's having a regular schedule that you follow. And the time schedules changes. There's been a lot of research around that and how detrimental it is to our health and increased heart attacks and such. And we keep doing the same nonsense.
The amount of sleep change as we get older? That's optimal?
Well, that's a good question. I'm afraid I don't have a really good answer for that. I mean, I know it becomes more fragmented, but I'm not sure that I've seen anything that's looked at then if it's fragmented, if it's cumulative, if it's comparable to the same hours when we're younger. I haven't seen anything like that.
It's not similar, but you can't have it, you need less sleep, but maybe it's just that you get less sleep.
Let's see, Gail had her hand raised. Gail, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? And
Well,
we're wrapping up here.
I just wanted to say that when we can't hear the audience, and if you could repeat the questions, it would be more interesting.
Okay. Um,
Well, we also brought, the, oh, okay. The dementia values and, priorities tool. Do you want to talk a
Oh,
little
sure.
bit about that?
So I asked Kate to bring something which I recommend to a lot of people. It's called the Dementia Values and Priorities Toolkit. This is something which is available through Compassion and Choices here in the state of California, which is a really, really good group. The reason I like this is because this is something that people can use as an addendum or an add-on to their healthcare directive that talks specifically about what your priorities would be if you came down with cognitive impairment. As age remains the #1 risk factor for coming down with a dementia, if we live long enough, we're all going to end up with some level of impairment. And so with this tool, it takes you through different scenarios, looking at limitations, such as if I had impairment such that I wasn't able to feed myself, would I want to have all health interventions keeping me alive as long as possible, or B, get health interventions, but nothing overly aggressive, or C, just allow nature to take its course. Meaning if I wasn't eating, that's okay, let me not eat. It might increase my risk of becoming more frail and might make my life shorter. But if I'm at that kind of a point in my life, then maybe that's the natural course for me to take. There are other things in there that talk about if I'm impaired and I can't control my bladder or my bowels, would I want my life prolonged with medications and full treatment? Would I want treatment but nothing aggressive? Or would I want just to allow a natural death if something happened? So it takes you through very, very specific options there. And I think it's really unique in that. Although I do know there are a couple ways you can do it even more detailed than this, but this is very, very well done. So I recommend this to people because if you fill something out like this, I think you can all feel a little bit more secure that you're not going to end up being a burden to your family. I saw my own mother go through dementia, and I think that's what led me into wanting to help other people in this situation. In the last year of her life, she was confined to a wheelchair and non-communicative. And I just kept thinking she would never have wanted this. So having these kinds of directives would give guidance. I've told my family many times over, if I become impaired where I'm not living independently, I don't want any tests or treatment that would prolong my life, because if I'm not running it and controlling it, that's not living in my book. So for those of us who are control freaks, outlining very clearly what you don't want is the best way to prevent the dreaded scenario that you're being kept alive by people with really good intentions.
To some degree, and then advanced care directive, which should be also on file with your doctor. If I have any file with you, see the same thing.
Not generally, no. The typical advanced healthcare directive doesn't go into anywhere near this level of detail.
This talk to some degree about if you can't function, you can do a certain choice.
But usually in the advanced healthcare directive, it talks about maybe stopping life support if you're in a situation where the medical team doesn't think you have a meaningful chance of survival. This is actually quite different than what is in the standard healthcare directive for the state of California. There's some other ones. There's the dementia directive. There are other ones out there. I like this one. I just think it's really good.
So this would be like an addendum to your.
Correct. Correct. This doesn't replace the advanced healthcare directive. It adds more detail to it.
Thank you for viewing this Next Village video recording. We hope you enjoyed it. Please help us spread the word and tell friends and neighbors about Next Village events and services for seniors and adults with disabilities in San Francisco. Visit our website to learn more about our vibrant, growing network, as well as to view our calendar of upcoming Zoom and in-person events and activities in San Francisco. Our website is nextvillagesf.org. Contact us to join our email list to learn about events and resources for seniors in San Francisco. And subscribe to the Next Village YouTube channel by clicking the button below.